Nothing is immutable. Anything is possible. This may be a controversial statement, but I believe that objective truth is a thing that exists. I believe in right and wrong answers and that there are choices which lead to objectively better outcomes, and that if we had access to an omniscient, all-knowing perspective, if we could somehow coalesce everything every being knows and experiences into some kind of universally accessible eldritch amalgamation, then we could use that to measurably plot out the best possible answers to every question. Fortunately, or unfortunately, this is not something we actually have access to yet. That doesn't make it a lost cause. It does not follow that something which does not exist can never exist, because nothing exists until it does. And there are evidently ways to get closer. We do not have to arrive at perfect in order to strive for better. Therefore, I am wholeheartedly of the opinion that it is actually reasonable and salient to pursue truth and goodness and material improvements to the experience of being alive while we're alive. But first, we have to believe that it is out there and accept that it is not something that we will ever possess. Anarchism is not a statement of intent nor an arbitrary desire for liberation. Anarchism is the process. If you say you want to change the world and you mean it, that's dope, but do it effectively. And honestly, even if you don't, even if all you want is to improve your own quality of life somewhat, that's dope too. But do it effectively. Do it effectively. We're gonna start with a quote from one of my favorite dead people, Italian anarchist Enrico Malatesta.
It is not enough to desire something. If one really wants it, adequate means must be used to secure it. And these means are not arbitrary, but instead cannot but be conditioned by the ends we aspire to, and by the circumstances in which the struggle takes place. For if we ignore the choice of means, we would achieve other ends, possibly diametrically opposed to those we aspire to. And this would be the obvious and inevitable consequence of our choice of means. Whoever sets out on the high road and takes a wrong turning does not go where he intends to go, but where the road leads him.
Literally, what the fuck does this mean, and why has it taken over not just my politics, but every aspect of my entire life? It's in my veins now, I can't stop it, but also I don't want to stop, and I think you should join me, because this shit's great. The unity of means and ends is a framework for understanding how to set unachievable, even unimaginable goals, and then actively move towards them in a way that genuinely realizes their potential. At least, in theory. And theory's tricky because of the thing I just did. Nothing is immutable, anything is possible. I am well aware that I sound like I'm about 37 seconds away from offering you some spicy Kool-Aid, but bear with me. Typically, right, when people are first exposed to new ideas, radical ideas, liberatory ideas, it happens like that. It happens backwards. We start by engaging with the conclusions. The abolition of all hierarchies, a stateless, moneyless, classless society, abundant, egalitarian love. If there comes a point where these conclusions have neither been dismissed out of hand nor taken for granted, if they spark some curiosity, then and only then does the opportunity arise to engage with the methodologies, the reasoning, and the theoretical groundwork that these conclusions are drawn from. There needs to be an actualized desire for these ends before people can access the proposed means. Capitalism is so prevalent that people need to be sold on anarchy before investing in anarchism. Which is a hard thing to do because anarchy is not for sale. You can practice anarchism, but you can't have anarchy. We can march towards anarchy, but we can't ever live there. Because right now, we live here. You and I, we've always lived here. No one alive today has had the opportunity to live in a world that isn't riddled with hierarchy. Capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, cis-heteropatriarchy, amatonormativity, anthropocentrism. We are several lifetimes away from even glimpsing a community unmarred by hierarchy, from accessing an anarchy. Now, these systems didn't spontaneously poof into existence, and we didn't put them here. They were built over decades, centuries, and millennia by the people who came before us. The foundations for these systems were being laid while we were just little specks of space dust, minding our own business. And now we live here. And we have to deal with the impact of these choices made by people who went real fast and broke things. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's a wonderful sentiment, just didn't quite materialize, did it? I'm not even American. Canada's no better. To be clear, I am all for going fast and breaking things. I am an anarchist. And we clearly need to be practicing discernment when it comes to what we break and whither we sprint. I mean, I can't imagine that anyone intended to build this world of manufactured scarcity, where we have more than enough resources to meet everybody's needs and then some, but act like we don't in order to line the pockets of a handful of elites, all while hurtling ourselves into an apocalyptic climate disaster that no one will be safe from. Turns out that you need more than a nice sentiment. You need vision and execution, intention and impact, theory and praxis, right? Because theory without effective praxis is a pipe dream, a forgotten treasure map sat in the back of a storeroom collecting dust forever. And praxis without effective theory is nothing more than a demoralizing exercise in futility, chaotically digging up holes with the unyielding belief that there's treasure somewhere, and whatever it is, if ever it's found, it'll all be worth this. In either case, the treasure stays buried forever, and we all live like this until the consequences of our actions wipe us off the face of the planet. These people that came before us, the capitalists, the colonizers, the patriarchs, they couldn't have known what they were setting in motion, and even if they did, couldn't have cared enough to tap the brakes. They had their own shit going on. But we can. We can do that. We're living in a dystopian hellscape that someone else designed, but we also have access to so much more than they ever could have dreamed of. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Dreamers and revolutionaries and scholars and practitioners who have been working to solve perennial echoes of the same structural issues that plague us today for generations. Not only do we have unprecedented access to their findings, to their lives and perspectives and experiments, we also have unprecedented access to each other. The most beautiful and horrifying thing about the internet we know and love is its capacity for specificity. There is no niche too small, no ideology too fringe, and no distance too great for affinity groups to coagulate and grow. Where you were once a lone weirdo, you now have access to a community of several other weirdos, if you know where to find them. I'm gonna let you in on a secret. This video is the reason this channel exists. I have been trying to explain the totality of this unity of means and ends concept to real people in real life and failing at it for a long time. So obviously, the answer was to lay out the whole thing in one go in this immortalized video essay format. The other videos currently on this channel are merely bonuses and prerequisites, but some are prerequisites, especially the one on hierarchy. If you haven't seen it, go watch and come back. You've probably heard the phrase impact over intent before, meaning that regardless of your intention, the impact of your actions are still your responsibility, which is demonstrably true, right? I may have had zero intention of breaking my glasses when I turned around too quickly and smashed my face into a pole, and yet, my glasses, they were broken, and I needed to do something about that if I wanted to see in HD again, which I did. Does that mean your intentions don't matter? Absolutely not. Your intentions matter so much. Where you choose to set your focus, the intentions that you define for yourself inevitably draw you towards vastly different actions and ultimately yield different results. Whether those results are the ones that you wanted are an entirely different story, but we'll come back to that later. Before we get into the whys and hows, let's talk a little bit about where this intuitive resistance to big revolutionary ideas comes from. When confronted with the reality of these deeply ingrained systemic problems, why is it that there are these tendencies to either look for ways to downplay the severity of the problems or go scorched earth? How is it that either everything is basically fine and the most we need to do is maybe make a couple of tweaks here and there, or everything is terrible and our only shot at redemption is to burn it all down no matter the cost? Why do we have such a hard time allowing ourselves to even imagine the possibility of an achievable utopia? The answer, I think, is hierarchy-induced fear. There are two wolves. No, but actually, inside every heart there are two wolves fighting. The one that's afraid of change and the one that's afraid of stasis. The one that craves stability and the one that craves freedom. The rules of hierarchy dictate that the one you feed the most wins, but there is no winning. There is only suppression. In our day-to-day choices, we can choose to feed one over the other, strengthen one over the other, but the fighting never ends. And suppressing our needs affects us because we're human. Who wants to live with a sad, wounded heart wolf? Maybe, I don't know, just a thought, but perhaps if there was enough to go around, if we fed both wolves, then they'd stop ripping each other to shreds over table scraps. By the way, fun fact about the original two wolves thing, it's racist as shit. All people inherently have good and evil battling inside of them, and which one wins is dependent on individual willpower and moral fortitude. If that sounds closer to right-wing moralism than indigenous wisdom of untraceable origins, that's because it is. The story, parable really, began circulating in 1978 in a book published by evangelical Christian minister Billy Graham, and it reflected hegemonic ideology while disguising it as counterculture, so it spread like wildfire. Colonialism strikes again. We cling to hierarchy because it feels safe and familiar. We already know how this works, we know what we're supposed to do, and when our needs aren't met, we know who to blame. Change isn't scary because of some innate personal failing or an irrational sense of anxiety or complacency. Change is usually scariest when we are legitimately underprepared or ill-equipped for that change to occur. Revolutionary, emancipatory, liberatory ideas feel like a gamble, a rigged competition where winner takes all because of hierarchy. Money is not the root of all evil, hierarchy is the root of all evil. And it has such a deleterious effect on our capacity and our well-being because it becomes this like one-two punch. First, there's the fear and grief that comes from realizing that things could be different. And then there's the shame that comes from knowing that when you learned that things could be different, you felt fear and grief. Obviously, the morally correct and righteous reaction would have been to immediately abandon your existing sense of identity, your cherished relationships, and all of your mundane worldly comforts in order to take up the mantle in service of the greater good, and you didn't do that and don't want to do that.
Shame!
There is a certain bleakness in finding hope where one expected certainty.
This internalized shame is what propels us into that paradigm of externalized shame and anger and denial. If we cannot hold space for our own complexity, if we cannot process even the existence of these intrapersonal dialectics, then we also cannot hold that space for the complexity of others, and instead default back to this sort of knee-jerk reaction, this binary understanding of right and wrong accompanied by a need to be on the correct side of that equation, the safe side of that equation, the top of the hierarchy, or at the very least, not the bottom. Listen, I've been making jokes about being politically unhinged for a while now, especially when hanging out with friends of the non-anarchist persuasion, but I just want to take a second to point out real quick that the bar is in hell. This silly little nonsense fantasy is like the starting line. All of these bizarro land buck wild ideas are fundamentally about people consistently having their needs met. And this is the thing that we're told is unreasonable, childish naivety. What an interesting impulse we've developed to preemptively deny ourselves that which may be withheld or invalidated by others. It's almost like a mechanism for coping, a reaction to a horrific situation with no end in sight, combined with this instinctual drive to persist and survive. Trauma. It's trauma. We've seen this over and over again. Mediocrity benefits from exploitation and abuse. Content warning for how graphic I'm about to get, but I really want to hammer this point home. Skip ahead if you don't want to hear it. If you look around and everywhere you turn, you see people eating piss and shit and vomit, and you look at your loved ones and they're eating piss and shit and vomit, and all your life you've been fed piss and shit and vomit, not only does a moldy sandwich start to look pretty okay, not only will you defend your access to a stale bag of chips with your life, but you start to resent having the need to eat. Forget what some loser talking about delicious gourmet food has to say. You're wishing hunger wasn't even a part of being alive. My love, your needs were never the problem. That we lack an apparatus for our needs to not only be met, but flow into each other is the problem. And it will never be solved by trying to stamp those needs out. It is solved by continually working to meet more and more of those needs. That's the hard part, the bit that stings the most, that not enough people talk about. It's not just working towards a dream that we know is out of reach, but also that it's such a tiny dream. It's not grandiose at all. Having our needs met is the bare minimum. It's raising the bar from hell to the floor. Who knows what's up there, what we might be capable of dreaming up once we breach the surface. This is not an easy thing to sit with. It's not easy to hold space for the grief and the fear, to honor what's come to pass and mourn what might have been. We deserve the Garden of Eden, but our land is barren. It's looking a little rough. Terraforming is a massive project, but it is so worthwhile, and not just for future generations. We can plant the trees, tend to them together, celebrate their growth and rest in their shade, even if we will have returned to space dust by the time they bear fruit. Liberatory joy isn't a delusion or a tagline, it's a necessity.
Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you.
There's no way Nietzsche could have ever predicted the internet, and yet somehow he managed to perfectly articulate the processes of becoming both red-pilled and black-pilled. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Those processes occur on every end of the political spectrum, by the way, we just use different names for them. It requires, I think, a certain skill set to be able to gaze into the abyss and then walk away with a roadmap, using that bleak reality as a canvas. But it is the skill set we must develop. Learning to do that is the only way to let it fuel us, to propel ourselves into something new, to refuse the demands that we remain firmly bolted down. The first step is acknowledging that reality, and the second step is identifying what those needs are. In order to find ways to start filling the gaps, we need to know where they are, what's missing, and why. This is tricky because hierarchy-induced trauma creates a tendency to confuse means for ends. We mutilate our desires to fit within the methods that are most easily accessible to us, rather than transform our methods to accommodate the fullness of our desire. For example, if you're hungry, you might confuse the underlying outcome, I want to feel full, with the means, I want a stale bag of chips. The chips are an assumed means to reach the desired ends. That doesn't mean the assumed means wouldn't work. There's a good chance that eating a stale bag of chips would in fact sate your hunger. The issue is that if we assume it's the answer and pour all of our resources into obtaining a stale bag of chips without further examination, we miss out on all of the other options for sating hunger, some of which are objectively better. Meals that are more filling, nutritionally balanced, and better tasting. Ones that make it so that you aren't quite so unsatisfied quite so often to begin with. So, if we're going on a treasure hunt, we gotta start by locating X on the map. Keep in mind, the way that maps work is that your path to X is going to be wholly dependent on your current location and the terrain ahead. We're not designing the path yet, we're setting a destination. First the ends, then the means. What do you want? What do you want? Whatever it is, let yourself want it without judgment. You want to be God ruler of the universe? Grand. You want a job promotion? Cool beans. You'd like a harem of anime girls? Okay, now take your desire and peel away as much of the built-in means as possible to reveal the ends to which you aspire. Why do you want to be God ruler? What are you hoping to accomplish with that? What needs are you trying to fill? Is it a sense of purpose and belonging? The respect of your peers? The inhibited ability to enact change as you see fit? Do you need all of that power because you don't trust that other people have the capacity or desire to adequately meet your needs or their own? Do you want to be a benevolent dictator because you crave being effortlessly loved and accepted for performing a role that's within your capacity? Or a fear dictator because you don't want the things and people that you cherish to be taken away from you? Do you want a job promotion? Or do you want the people around you to recognize you as worthy and acknowledge your efforts? Do you want a job promotion, or do you want more money? Do you want more money, or do you want more of the things that money can buy? Is the harem of anime girls about wanting to be loved and desired unconditionally just for being you, or is it about the social capital that comes with bagging a harem of anime girls? Or both? Notice that even the stripped down versions I'm offering are still ends painted with means. They could be stripped down even further. When we strip away all assumed means, the essence of all underlying needs and desires are basically universal. Freedom, safety, expression, connection. We all want to belong, we all want to be worthy, we all want to have fun, we all want to be happy. Once you've figured out what's missing, mark X on your map. How we achieve those things, the means, the methods, and material circumstances required are going to be unique based on our circumstances. But if we confuse those means for ends, we will inevitably veer off track. You may have noticed that folks who try to make themselves whole by hoarding wealth never feel like they have enough, or that landing that dream job can feel less like crossing the finish line and more like being shackled to a shiny new treadmill. If you want the right answers, you gotta ask the right questions. Please excuse the lighting changes. I forgot that the sun goes down at 4 p.m. now, and that's where we're at. I made a mess. People have a weirdly easy time opening up to me. And I mean people who are close to me, yeah, but also like acquaintances and perfect strangers. This has been the case since long before I figured out how to hold space without judgment. If you sat down next to me at a bus stop and told me your life story, I was judging you while plotting an escape. Here's my... okay. There are exceptions, but for the most part, I have a hard time with eye contact, and I've gotten pretty good at giving off this like, yeah, don't touch me vibe, you know what I mean? Like, just let's keep a respectful distance. And lately, I've been wondering if maybe something about that feels like privacy, even if I'm clearly paying attention and asking very intrusive questions. I don't know. But as I've grown more vocal about anarchism and being an anarchist, some of the deep, dark secrets people will divulge to me now, unprompted in the sacred confessional of a house party patio or sat on my couch high on something in the liminal space between 2 and 5 in the morning, I've started to hear things like, I love my partner and my family so much, but sometimes I wish they'd just leave me alone for like a couple of hours, you know, just like for a few days, like a little vacation, you know? Or, yeah, I don't want to work at all. Like that, in that tone, self-deprecating and almost mocking, like they're half expecting me to laugh at them or make jokes, commiserate about being too lazy or stupid or selfish. Oh? You're telling me that you prefer to pursue your passions freely without the threat of financial ruin? You'd like time to rest and play without feeling fearful, guilty, or overwhelmed by the lost opportunity cost. You want to do things for and with your community and then have the tangible fruits of your labor materially impact your life rather than perform some menial task in a production line where someone who doesn't know you exist gets paid for your labor and someone else who doesn't know you exist receives the tangible fruits of said labor. You want to be in loving connection with those you care about while maintaining a sense of autonomy and individual personhood. Tell me more. Unhinge yourself from reality and take no prisoners. There can be no compromise here. We cannot dismantle oppressive systems while operating from the position that they are too well established, too well ingrained in the human experience to do anything about. We can marvel in their destruction even if we will not live to see their complete annihilation. Fuck reality. All my homies hate reality.
What we do here is go back
to reality. Time isn't linear, but we experience it as linear. What order did I record these segments in? It's a mystery, but you're probably watching this after a bad Eminem reference and before a quote from Heraclitus. At least the first time you watch this video, you're more likely to skip around if you came back.
No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he is not the same man.
Oh, there it is. There are a lot of quotes in this video, but it's 90 minutes long and other people are really good at having already written wonderfully coherent analogies and descriptions, so cut me some slack. Stillness is a lie, winning is a lie, time is always moving forward and life changes with it. No matter how much you may love a movie, you only get to experience it for the first time once. Even if you went back and reproduced every single variable of your watching experience, same place, same outfit, same snack, same company, you won't ever get to experience that first time again. People care a lot about first times, and some of that's patriarchal hangover, but not all of it. Firsts are formative. They form the scaffolding that everything afterwards has to build on and contend with. This is why people have such a visceral reaction to spoilers. Once you've encountered that plot twist, there is no going back. From then onwards, it will forever be a different experience, and if you hit rewind expecting to relive an experience, you will be disappointed. Now, if you watch a movie you love and then choose to watch it again, knowing it'll be a different experience this time, you'll find new things to appreciate. You get to zero in on small aesthetic details that you missed. The foreshadowing hits differently, and don't even get me started on introducing things you love to people you like and getting to watch them experience it for the first time. Or hitting up a movie that you watched like a decade ago that you've forgotten most of the details of, but you still get hit with that delicious nostalgia. It's good shit. Neither time nor people are stagnant. The ever-changing sum of our experiences is permanently transformative. So trying to capture a moment in a bottle, to live in rather than remember, is only ever, at best, a waste of energy, and at worst, a one-way ticket to the abyss. This is what hierarchy is and does. It is the attempt to have dominion over the flow of time, to position the pieces just so and then glue them down. It is objectification in the truest sense of the word, the distilling of dynamic subjects into objects, as though they are vessels that exist to perform whatever functions have been projected onto them forever. Hierarchy is the fairy tale of endless economic growth, of wars fought and won and finished, of permanence, of a pre-designed, universally applicable step-by-step guide to succeeding in life, of an unchanging, unconditional, and eternal love, of a binary existence. Hierarchy is the fantasy that safety can be cultivated through control. The hierarchical systems that dictate our lives aren't going to spontaneously disappear, no matter how badly we may want them to. We need to set our sights on something better and then actively make choices that bring us materially closer to those ideals. Ongoing exposure and participation is transformative, prefigurative even. The ideas, beliefs, values, and behaviors that are modeled for us and available to us are the ones that inform our understanding of the world. People are always talking about human nature this and human nature that, like it's some kind of great revelation. Obviously, people have an easier time operating within the systems that surround them. Obviously, people are affected by their upbringings. Obviously, people reproduce and build upon the only ideas and foundational material that they've been given access to, especially when alternative ideas are intentionally and systemically suppressed by people who believe that they stand to benefit from the status quo.
To look at people in capitalist society and conclude that human nature is egoism is looking at people in a factory where pollution is destroying their lungs and saying that it is human nature to cough.
If we're serious about wanting things to be different, then we need the capacity to imagine things which are different. One of my favorite things is when I spend hours upon hours meticulously explaining the ins and outs of a hierarchical system, how it came to be, why it works, the undesirable impacts of said system, potential areas of intervention for dismantling said system, and then someone comes along very helpfully and is just like, no, but you don't understand, that's how the system works. All the things you're complaining about are inherent to the system functioning. Without those things, the system wouldn't even be a thing anymore. My sibling in Christ. Between the two of us, I am not the one experiencing confusion right now. I get that people shop fast fashion because self-expression and desirability and respectability are required for both connection and currency, and that if your labor is being exploited, then there isn't enough leftover time and energy to make your own clothing, and there isn't enough leftover money to pay someone the fair value of their labor. I know that it's inherently exhausting and demoralizing to be fighting an uphill battle every moment of every day while wielding the heavy-ass, blunt-ass weapons you've been handed. I understand the cyclical nature of exploitation that these systems require to function. My critique is not of individuals doing their best to live well within the systems that they have access to. It is of the systems that prevent us from accessing truly liberatory alternatives. Free will is fake. There are many ways to conceptualize freedom, and the one that resonates most with me is, unsurprisingly, a dialectic. Two seemingly oppositional forces that, when in communication with one another, have the potential to synthesize truth. My belief is that freedom, to act, to change, to be, occurs when there is an alignment between internal and external power. Internal power referring to the variables that are cultivated within oneself, knowledge, skill, desire, these variables which are incorporeal, the manifestation of idealism. So follows, external power refers to the variables which are cultivated outside of the self. Circumstances, opportunity, resources, community, variables which are tangible, the manifestation of materialism. These are, of course, moving parts that necessarily inform one another. The dichotomy between materialism and idealism is a false one. Our material conditions influence which knowledge, skills, and desires we have the capacity to access, which influences the material conditions that we have the capacity to construct, which influences our internal power, which influences our external power, and so on ad infinitum. That's what power is, the actualized capacity derived from the relationship of those two forces. In other words, people only have access to what they have access to. People are like spreadsheets. Genetic variables and life experiences can be thought of as like a data set of variables which act as inputs. When applied contextually, in reference to the totality of their journey through space-time, these inputs produce specific outcomes. The spreadsheet that we have most access to is our own, although even then only partially. So attempting to apply formulas that we've discerned for ourselves, this process of if this then that, to other people will always yield inaccurate results, yeah? Just because I like biscuits doesn't mean that you like biscuits, and just because I wanted biscuits yesterday with tea doesn't mean that I'm going to want them tomorrow with tuna. Still with me? If we time traveled to the past and somehow swapped your soul with someone else's at birth, nothing that followed would change. Upon returning to the present, you would simply be that person. It wouldn't be a body swap where you retained parts of your personality while living through different experiences. You wouldn't be an approximation or a copycat. You would embody their very essence. Every thought they've ever had, every emotion, every dream, you would have made all of the same choices, exhibit all of the same mannerisms, and believe all of the same things. And they would be you. We're here because we're here. If you live the same day over and over with your memory wiped at the end of each cycle, every moment would be identical no matter how many times the cycle repeated. With no change in variables, I will always have wanted biscuits with tea yesterday. Sometimes people find this concept to be kind of depressing or defeatist, but I think it's really the opposite. If we understand people to be the sum of their experiences, then we know that by understanding those experiences, we can find methods of effective intervention. Change becomes an achievable possibility. There are patterns amongst humans, certain combinations of traits and experiences that are more or less likely to yield particular outcomes. And yet simultaneously, the holistic sum of those traits and experiences is completely unique to each individual. So the only way to even have a shot at predicting accurate outcomes is to seek out those patterns by communicating with others, and especially by seeking to understand folks with different traits and experiences than our own. And I mean, look, if you believe in free will, that is totally your prerogative, and I'm not here to tell you you're wrong, but it is evidently an ineffective framework to operate with. As far as I'm concerned, the value in this blend of determinism and positionality isn't gleaned from its status as universal truth, but from its utility. Even if we don't agree that people are wholly constructed by their circumstances, if you think that on some level people just are the way that they are, that they can be evil, shitty, cruel, selfish, lazy, incompetent, manipulative, or ignorant due to some inherent quality branded on their soul that no circumstances could alter, or that they simply choose to be that way because it grants them some kind of perceived advantage, then it still follows that the best way to address this reality is to adapt and accommodate. We'd still have to shift the way that we organize our lives and our communities in such a way that prevents anyone from acquiring a privileged position or status within it that might allow them to coerce and exploit others. Because if some people just are awful, ruling others is a possibility, and antisocial behavior grants an advantage, then it will always be folks with antisocial tendencies who rule, right? Or not. Feel free to bootstrap and personal responsibility yourselves into oblivion, I guess. I'm not a cop. I'm a fucking nerd on YouTube, Jesus Christ. Nonetheless, I believe that if we collectively woke up tomorrow and suddenly all of the hierarchical structures we live within were gone, no longer being enforced by the state or whatever, we would collectively immediately recreate them. Even if the slate were somehow wiped clean, all bank accounts set to zero, laws and policies changed to enshrine equal rights, everyone was literally transformed into identical gray blobs, we, the people mysteriously isekai to this brave new world, would not be blank canvases. We would bring along the hierarchy that's been baked into us over the course of our fucking lifetimes. We might create completely different hierarchies.
Actually, we're the grayest and the blobbiest.
But hierarchies they would be. And that makes perfect sense, because that is the skill set that we've inherited and the trauma that we've spent our lives developing coping mechanisms for. Thanks to colonialism, everything else pretty much has been or is on its way to becoming wiped out. To actually have any hope of cultivating a new, different system, we literally have to snipe everyone alive and then ourselves. Unless there was some way to enact change transformatively, restoratively, a way to become people with the skill sets, desires, and resources to organize ourselves differently, a way to build the new within the shell of the old, or as historical anarchists put it, to build the embryo of the human society of the future. Good news, there are ways to do that. Bad news, it's difficult and unintuitive. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, and easier to imagine the end of capitalism than what comes after. But we, unironically, need to be able to do just that. We need to have some idea of where we're headed and what's going to replace the systems that we're so hell-bent on dismantling. And people understand that intrinsically, which is I think where a lot of the skepticism around anarchism comes from, and even around certain emancipatory ideas within anarchist spaces. The opposite of disempowered isn't powerful, it's empowered. In order to empower people to enact change, we need to start by understanding the factors that are currently contributing to their disempowerment. In my experience, hearing the phrase, "that sounds good in theory but doesn't work in practice," in reference to liberatory ideas is like a dead giveaway that someone hasn't meaningfully engaged the theory really at all. They've engaged the conclusions. And that's not like an individual issue to be resolved. The fact that this theory is so inaccessible to so many people is a systemic problem, or more accurately, a symptom of a system working exactly as it's meant to. You don't need to pour a ton of time and energy and resources into understanding the practical application of hierarchy because we are drenched in it. You can take Econ 101 and immediately internalize supply and demand, the idea that markets determine value, because that's how the world currently works. You've seen it in action since you were a child. You've heard about it since you were in middle school. The introductory theory doesn't need to spin you in a 180 or even expand your periphery. It doesn't need to make any connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. It just highlights and reinforces what's already in front of you. And that's fine. We do need to understand what's in front of us, know thy enemy and all that, but it's so much easier because you get to just go with the flow. It's what we've been prefigured for. You don't need to understand anything about the inner mechanisms of a camera to know that when you push the button, a photo is taken. Until it doesn't. Until something breaks or your photos turn out to be somehow disappointing to you. Likewise, you don't need to take one single gender studies class in order to engage with society in a way that reinforces cis heteropatriarchy or white supremacy or ableism or adultism or monogamy. It's modeled for you everywhere. We only come to interrogate these systems when faced with tension, either firsthand via marginalization or secondhand via exposure and education. In other words, we realize these molds are not designed to encapsulate nor enhance the vastness of the human experience by trying and failing to conform and/or by internalizing the experiences of those who do not conform and now operate outside of the arbitrary guidelines enforced by these systems. We only start to ask questions when confronted with evidence that these molds are not set in stone. They are lines of chalk on the ground that have the potential to be redrawn or washed away as we see fit. But if not this, then what? Right? Surely we can't just break down the world order and call it a day. What about undesirable labor? What about bad actors? What about limited resources? What about experts? What about homes? What about food? What about scalability? What about criminals? What about climate? Very good. These are good questions. Important questions. I think the answers I have to offer are going to be initially unsatisfactory to you, but stay the course. You can ask these questions to 10 different anarchists and get at least 10 different answers. There might be some common themes among them around mutual aid, consensus, abolitionism, and so on, but when it comes to nailing down the day-to-day specifics, it gets very, very slippery. And when you're accustomed to hierarchy, this seems like inconsistency and incoherency, but there are two fundamental flaws to that line of thinking. First is that perfectionism is a curse that prevents action. This all-or-nothing standard of certainty demands perfect solutions to problems which have never been solved. The systems we currently operate under are buckling under the weight of these very crises. None of the valid concerns regarding potentially harmful effects of a new system have been fixed by any of the existing social structures and are in fact being literally exacerbated right now. And second, we can't know. If we can understand that our lived experiences transform us, then it follows that they have transformed us. There is no hitting the undo button. We can't Control Z ourselves out of this one. There is only understanding, accommodating, and adapting. We can't know how these things would work within a society designed to cultivate anarchy, because we live within a society designed to cultivate hierarchy. We have hierarchical brain rot. We can make guesses, sure, but the value in these thought experiments isn't in the solutions we come up with themselves. The solutions are inevitably lacking. We can't actually project ourselves into the future, because our experience of time is linear. If anarchy can exist, then the people who have the power to cultivate anarchy will come long after we are gone, and they will come with answers we could never have conceived of, which isn't to throw our hands up and paint a scenario where there's nothing to do but wait for them. If we fap about going, well, the next generations will solve it, then they won't have the chance to. It's on us to forge the tools they need and reshape the world in their favor. We are simultaneously developers and beta testers. We are quality assurance and software engineers. We are the features and the bugs.
And as the conscience, determination, and capacity of men continuously develop and find means of expression in the gradual modification of the new environment and in the realization of desires in proportion to their being formed and becoming imperious, so it is with anarchism. Anarchism cannot come but little by little, slowly but surely growing in intensity and extension. Therefore, the subject is not whether we accomplish anarchism today, tomorrow, or within 10 centuries, but that we walk towards anarchism today, tomorrow, and always.
I think that there is value in engaging with these hypotheticals and thought experiments, but that it's in measuring the evolution and expansion of our own internal power, and noticing the minute shifts in what we're capable of coming up with, and noticing how those shifts reshape the ways we interact with the world, and how the world interacts with us in turn. It's really more of like a progress bar that we can mine for dopamine by testing against previous markers, watching it fill up within and throughout our lifetimes. We're not capable of true anarchy, yet. But we're capable of practicing anarchism in ways that genuinely increase our capacity, that better equip ourselves, the people around us, and the people who come after us for anarchy. So not knowing isn't a cop-out. It is an acknowledgement of fact and a very deliberate refusal to fall into the trap of confusing means for ends.
We anarchists do not want to emancipate the people. We want the people to emancipate themselves.
My project is not making an anarchy, it's making anarchists. Partly because anarchists are a prerequisite to capital A anarchy, yes, but mostly because anarchists are awesome, joyful, passionate, empathetic, collaborative problem solvers with a shared vision and the capacity to execute are exactly the types of people that I want to surround myself with. Nothing beats being in community with folks who ask interesting questions and chase after interesting answers, who see the limitations of what is as a challenge rather than a rule. These are the communities that I want to build and collaborate with. In this case, more is more, and more is better. Portal is a first-person puzzle platformer where you run around from room to room using your handy-dandy portal gun to navigate various obstacles. You've got your little blue portal and your little orange portal, and they somehow connect space-time via little wormholes while preserving kinetic momentum. Neat. Wait, no, come back. I promise this is relevant. That explanation was redundant, because chances are you already know how portal guns work, even if you've never played Portal. Not only is it an incredibly popular award-winning game, it's also generated a metric buttload of memes, including one of my personal all-time favorites, Now You're Thinking with Portals. This is not a gaming analysis channel, so I'm not going to get into it too much, but what's really cool about the Portal gameplay mechanic is that as you play the game, as the challenges get more and more complex, it kind of rewires your interpretation of space-time and allows one to imagine entirely new ways to navigate what would otherwise be like another run-of-the-mill platformer where you jump around and timed keystroke combos and shit. And as the popularity of the Portal franchise exploded, we got more and more of these memes, these delightful examples of people taking their newly developed Portal brains and exploring creative ways to apply that mechanic in real life. Now, to my knowledge, we are a very long ways from anyone actually acquiring a real Portal gun, and yet, there's a sizable community of people who may not understand the why or how behind portal guns, nor the science or theory required to turn that idea into a reality, but they get how portals work. They've internalized an almost instinctual visualization of the ways that space-time might be altered to achieve various ends. They're thinking with portals, and if they were mysteriously transported to a world with burgeoning portal gun technology, they'd have some pretty cool ideas. Now, could these newly transported denizens keep up with the locals of Portal Land? Not a chance. Being introduced to a mechanic, grasping it on a bare-bones theoretical level, beginning to weave it into your worldview, these are requisites for successfully integrating that mechanic into a functional skill set. But so is actually having the opportunity to develop that skill set in a tangible, meaningful way. You need adequate exposure to the mechanic, you need a tutorial, you need experience points to level up. Imagine a skill tree, where as life progresses and you make decisions about where to allocate your experience points, certain builds become possible and others become locked off, because lifetimes and therefore experience points are in limited supply to the average mortal. In order for a group of people to be able to meaningfully participate in a society designed around portal gun capabilities, they'd need to be transported there from a society that's already integrated portal gun technology to such an extent that they'd have had a chance to develop a portal build. And it's not enough for portal builds to simply exist on the skill tree, a hidden option that goes totally ignored or even undiscovered because there are cooler, funner, and more immediately relevant builds available. It must also be genuinely desirable. And I'm just gonna shoehorn this in here, but portal builds are diverse. We'd need portal engineers and architects and artists and bakers. It's not like a single linear option that you kind of chase after and then you get hit with the portal build designation at level 50 or whatever, but rather one that can be unlocked by collecting certain combinations of common skills. Portal build is a class, or a party maybe, a guild. Is this analogy holding up? I wanted to use Portal because of the perfectly illustrative memes, but maybe the prefigurative nature of Dungeons & Dragons or Stardew Valley would have translated better. It's too late now, I'm not redoing this. If the Portal video game was designed with Portal build prefiguration in mind, then the enjoyment of the game, the cool-ass graphics, the characters, the world building, the story, the dopamine hit that comes from working out a particularly tricky puzzle, the fandom communities and the memes that tend to crop up around hits like this, none of these things would be the goal. They'd be the method. The process must be visible, enjoyable, rewarding, and sustainable enough to both draw people in and incentivize continued participation. There would need to be people who chose to pursue portal builds over all other options long before Portal Land was ever on the horizon. Otherwise, by the time they were transported there, they'd be totally unprepared. That's the fascinating paradox about revolution, is that in order for change to occur, change must have already occurred. And that's not just true of revolution, but of any dream, goal, or desire. Once we've set our ideal, marked X on our map, we must then work backwards to develop the material circumstances in which that ideal becomes not just a possibility, but an inevitability. Those ideal material circumstances become a landmark, the tangible representation of having reached the correct milestone on your roadmap. From here, we continue to work backwards, setting more and more milestones, plotting out each set of prefigurative circumstances required, becoming less and less abstract until we arrive at our current location, a visible landmark in sight and within reach. In other words, you gotta be bad at a thing in order to get good at the thing, but if you're bad in isolation, you'll be bad at it forever. Improvement, progress, these come from participation and discourse. It must be dialogical. They say comparison is a thief of joy, and yeah, obviously it totally can be. But comparison can also lead to inspiration and curiosity and innovation. There is, I think, a fundamental distinction to be made when it comes to comparison born of competition rather than community. If you do something 100 times the exact same way without learning from past attempts, without receiving feedback or seeking out new possibilities or engaging with new techniques or perspectives, you won't actually get much better. Repetition alone is worthless. Anything worth anything is born of connection. Realistically, if you want to get good at a thing, then you have to consume variations of the thing in mass quantities. You have to analyze the thing from every angle you can get your claws on. You have to interact with people who do the thing better than you or differently, and then make your own connections and slowly carve out your own unique wavelength that can be tuned into when others engage with your thing. I'm not just talking about your craft or your trade or your art or your business. I'm talking about your politics, your relationships, and your very way of being. Excellence is a community effort. It takes a village. So, here are 5 steps to a cool new thing. Propaganda, education, participation, mastery, and legacy. Transformative communities are developed by transformed individuals, and for transformation to occur within either, every step of the way must be desirable, accessible, and rewarding. So going backwards, a new legacy requires individuals with adequate mastery of the skill sets needed to operate within it. This mastery is developed through consistent practice of those skills, which must be informed by adequate education, which must be inspired through repetitive exposure to enticing propaganda, which must be created by individuals who possess mastery of the prerequisite skill sets. It is a continuous cycle that only spins forward through the synthesis of internal and external power. This is why trading liberation for equality consistently reproduces the hierarchical, hegemonic world order we've become so accustomed to. If the goal is equality, then assimilation will always be the outcome, because that is the skills that develop through the process. The propaganda, education, and practice inevitably produces individuals who are seduced by the boot and ultimately seek not to destroy it, but become it. This is, very basically, the theory behind prefigurative politics. This is not how prefigurative politics is normally explained. Usually, people talk about very specific types of direct action. Labor movements, protests, tenants' unions, food kitchens, that sort of thing. The idea being that by participating in these sorts of horizontally organized movements, getting to build social relations with folks who are working towards the same goals, and who are invested in building up the collective by looking out for autonomy, practicing decision-making and conflict resolution through consensus, employing empathy and respect, people develop the skills and understanding and social relationships that they need in order to divest from hierarchy in other circumstances. To carry that prefiguration forward and to participate in, model, grow, and construct more and more non-hierarchical communities and organizations, and that as the effectiveness of those methods is proven, as they bring about immediate reforms and improvements to the quality of life of the participants, they also develop within themselves, and any who bear witness, genuine desire to pursue and expand those methods, like a drop that ripples out into massive waves. I am wholeheartedly on board with this approach and with the more common examples. There are a bunch of content creators that do an excellent job of explaining the historical precedent for these types of movements and how to develop or participate in these kinds of organizations within a modern context. I'm gonna link a few of those below. That said, my shtick is relationships. Up until now, this video has been primarily geared towards mapping out some of the basic political theories surrounding anarchy, but this channel is about applying those theories to our relationships, with each other and ourselves and the world around us as a whole. My obsession is connection for a reason, empathetic self-direction through objection and introspection, a rejection of possession in favor of collective insurrection. I believe that relationship anarchy has the potential to be one of the most powerful and directly accessible forms of prefigurative politics out there, if practiced with a foundational understanding of anarchist theory. I don't see relationship anarchy as a distinct branch or tendency within anarchism, but a core component that's been overlooked. And I say this with the knowledge that, as far as I can tell, most anarchists don't practice relationship anarchy, and most relationship anarchists don't practice anarchism. I have my own theories about why that is, but that's for another video. This one it's got enough in it, I feel. A lot of people lump relationship anarchy in with polyamory, and that causes a lot of confusion because they are not the same. To clarify, I am just as here for monogamy as I am polyamory, which is to say, not at all. Polyamory is to relationship anarchy what mainstream liberalism is to political anarchy. Yes, there is a concerted effort to dispute the value of exclusivity within so-called romantic and sexual relationships, but non-hierarchical relating goes so far beyond that. It's not just an appreciation for, or co-optation of, the aesthetic of liberation, nor is it a simple statement of intent. It is the process of rewiring our understanding of connection whole cloth, of working to deconstruct all inter- and interpersonal hierarchy in order to rebuild horizontally.
You cannot buy the revolution. You cannot make the revolution. You can only be the revolution. It is in your spirit, or it is nowhere.
Listen, we all have relationships. Familial, romantic, platonic, mentors, acquaintances, colleagues, strangers, bosses. The entirety of our society is made up of dyadic relationships. These are the bonds between atoms which make up the molecules of the world we live in. We are all part of something much bigger than ourselves, even when we can't see that. Ergo, learning to practice anarchism within our interpersonal relationships not only primes us to be able to internalize those more liberatory worldviews and carry those ideas and skill sets into more explicitly revolutionary movements and organizations, but it is a necessity for them to succeed. How often do we hear about progressive movements and initiatives that fall apart, not only because of pressure from external forces, but also because the people within them lack a holistic and intersectional framework for navigating interpersonal conflict, differentiation, burnout, and power imbalances? How often do we hear about progressive liberatory movements that end up slowly drifting away from their ideals over time until they become an abandoned memory? How often does this result in marginalized and radical perspectives being repeatedly dismissed, if not silenced, until they are forced to either submit or abscond? It only takes like one person wielding hierarchy over another, even inadvertently, for these groups to begin fracturing beyond repair. And then they dissolve on their own due to irreconcilable harm, become so far removed from their radical roots that they're functionally a hegemonic reproduction of hierarchy, or crumple apart at even the lightest tap of pressure from external forces. How often do we see exact replicas of these dynamics and consequential fractures paralleled within social relationships of all kinds? Lovers, friendships, family, colleagues, teammates, strangers, within households, schools, churches, offices, parties, and on Twitter.com. It's relationships all the way down. None are free until all are free isn't a catchphrase, it's a representation of reality. We all have different pieces of the puzzle. Non-hierarchical relating requires understanding that we are all unique individuals with a unique set of life experiences that we carry into every moment. That no one is more inherently valuable than you are, and that you are not more inherently valuable than anyone else. That we are all deserving of respect and compassion and empathy and of having all of our needs met, and that every moment of disrespect, of dehumanization, of unmet needs is a tragic failing brought about by systems that produce and reproduce hierarchy. 'Tis the process of developing the skills to anticipate what may be on another person's spreadsheet, how they got there, what they may need, and to what extent you have the capacity to collaborate with them. This is why when analyzing hierarchy and power dynamics within any and all interpersonal relationships, we need to focus on equity rather than equality. We may all have the same base needs, but we have different means of meeting them. A painter and a sculptor are both working towards creative self-expression, but one needs paint and the other needs clay. They don't need to be given an equal allotment of identical supplies. They need equitable access to the supply room. They need different spaces and different mentors. They need more and less of different things. If we cannot yet anticipate and meet those needs outright, then we must collaborate. And if we cannot yet collaborate, then we must learn to anticipate which circumstances may be required to build the capacity for collaboration and then work towards them. If to be in a committed relationship is to commit oneself to emotional availability, mutual growth, interdependence, and flexibility in the face of changing circumstances, then my aim is to be committed to every person I ever cross paths with, no matter what context and no matter how briefly. This is not within reach. I am limited in my capacity and will be until the day I die, but that is an end to which I aspire, an ideal that informs the way I live my life that I might inch ever closer. I will never have perfect relationships, but cultivating more and more of those moments, those glimpses of authentic, vulnerable, and free connection is just makes being alive worth the trouble. Alrighty. We have some means, we have some ends, and we have arrived at the crux of the matter. They do not play nicely together. Not out of some inherent incompatibility, but as a result of our current conditions and how far we have to go. It is not enough to desire something. If one really wants it, adequate means must be used to secure it. And these means are not arbitrary, but instead cannot but be conditioned by the ends we aspire to and the circumstances in which the struggle takes place. For if we ignore the choice of means, we would achieve other ends, possibly diametrically opposed to those we aspire to, and this would be the obvious and inevitable consequence of our choice of means. Whoever sets out on the high road and takes a wrong turning does not go where he intends to, but where the road leads him. If we cannot project ourselves into the future, then how can we tell if we're going the right way? What if, despite our best efforts, things don't get better, or get even worse? This will sound glib, but elaboration is mere minutes away. If things stay the same or get worse, you're doing it wrong. Therefore, when you're on the right track, circumstances must continually be improving. Here are the problems with this, right? 1, people measure improvement with different metrics and rubrics. 2, revolution may bloom in the individual, but ultimately requires cooperation with other people. And 3, it does not matter how far we go if we are constantly dragged back. The only way to move forward is to understand that the roadmap and the skill tree are one and the same, merely perceived in different dimensions. The map we've sketched out is a 2D drawing of a 3D plane that renders in real time. We've plotted out a path from start to end, but this guide becomes increasingly obsolete the further we progress. We don't actually know what lies ahead. There will be unanticipated roadblocks, there will be dangerously unfamiliar terrain, there will be loot boxes and secret underground tunnels. Landmarks will need to be moved, removed, or replaced, skill sets will need to evolve, even the very ends to which we aspire will likely change over time. The map must be updated constantly, but unlike Google Maps, there is no omnipresent satellite to preemptively predict a change of plans, or redirect you if you make a wrong turn, so learning how to navigate is the way forward. And because everyone starts off in a different location, every path forward is unique. The ends to which we aspire may or may not come into alignment with others, but our means can never be identical. While there may be times where our paths intersect, for brief encounters or long stretches, we ultimately live different lives. This diversity of tactics inherent to anarchism isn't an accident, it's the point. But look, theory is often dense and niche and complicated and boring and jargony. Much of the language and methodology used by radicals is inevitably filtered down through the lenses of mainstream liberalism, to such an extent that they're functionally a reproduction of hegemonic ideas, tinged with the aesthetics of liberation. Mutual aid becomes synonymous with charity, abolition gets mistaken as advocating for the purge, and don't even get me started on allyship. Such is also the case with diversity of tactics and direct action. It's easy to get caught up in the optics and accessibility, but here's the thing. Which words and phrases we use doesn't matter, because they're semantic shortcuts developed for use within a particular context in which their complexity is assumed. The moment they're removed from that context, their meaning is inevitably altered in order to be understood. They take on mainstream coloring, and they go from being shortcuts to detours. In order to get that intended meaning back, we'd have to explain all of that dense theory, to go the long scenic route which many people find boring and complicated and irrelevant. It's a self-perpetuating systemic problem with no easy answer. And I think a lot of anarchists might disagree with what I'm about to say, but I am of the opinion that direct action is whatever actually moves us closer. Protesting, unionizing, organizing, volunteering, these are all actions or activities that have the potential to bring us closer to our desired ends if performed effectively, and pull us further away if performed ineffectively. Art, rest, play, and even debate also have the potential to both bring us closer or hold us back. Direct action is whatever works. Genuinely works, not just whatever's easiest, whatever you want, or whatever seems like it should work. If we trade in liberation for complacency, equality, or domination, we will not move towards a new world order, but fall back into a recreation of the existing world order. In some ways, I think the direct quality of action is most effectively measured retroactively, because until we can access omniscience, we can't know what will have worked, and so these are all just patterns to learn from. Direct action is taking matters into your own hands, accurately selecting whatever means move us along the path towards our ends. It's becoming an active participant instead of waiting on the world to change or giving up. It is the unity of means and ends. So, given that we are permanently transformed by the hierarchy we've endured, it is inevitable that we will choose poor landmarks or engage in means which prefigure us away from better ones, no matter how pure or abstract our desired ends. It is precisely because veering off track is an inevitability that we have to learn to recognize when that's happened as early on as possible and course correct. There are a bunch of false dichotomies that permeate basically every single space and every single conversation that I've ever been a part of throughout all of the time that I've spent engaging with political and personal discourse. And when I say that these dichotomies are false, I don't mean that there aren't people, ideologies, or communities that value or align themselves with one side over the other. I'm saying the fact that there are is perfectly emblematic of the problem, because what makes them false dichotomies is that they are true dialectics. And as far as I can tell, they're basically all different manifestations of the same perceived dissonance between what we have to lose and what we want to have. Familiarity and novelty, reliability and exploration, comfort and growth, peace and lucidity, collectivism and individualism, materialism and idealism, reform and revolution, social anarchism and insurrectionary anarchism, solidarity and autonomy, safety and freedom, these are not one or the other but halves of a whole. They inform one another. To neglect one weakens both. This is the danger of hegemonic thought and counterthought, each serving to reproduce hierarchy. No matter which end of these binaries you choose, by engaging with these values as though they exist on a binary, a zero-sum game where one comes at the expense of the other, you end up further disempowering the disempowered, yourself included. Marginalized perspectives get shafted and hierarchy is reinforced. If we prioritize our ideals over the immediate material reality, then the perspectives of those who do not have the power to opt out are dismissed. And if we prioritize our immediate material needs over the ideal reality, then the perspectives of those who do not have the power to conform are dismissed. Both of these positions are born of privilege. And I hate using the word privilege because the common semantic understanding implies benefit and like an overabundance of resources, when what I'm gesturing towards right now is actually a lack of resource. The experience of privilege comes with a specific kind of ignorance, a distinct scarcity of insight. We're all missing something. But the kinds of ignorance developed through the experience of marginalization doesn't come from a lack of exposure to hierarchical ideals, but from a societally built-in lack of support for alternative perspectives. It's repetitive, non-stop, day in and day out. To be against the grain is exhausting, and without adequate support or access to resources, some degree of internalization is functionally inevitable. Whereas ignorance developed through the experience of privilege comes from the constant support and reinforcement of hierarchical ideals, and an altogether lack of meaningful exposure to alternative perspectives. And despite my earlier spiel on false dichotomies, I still feel the need to clarify that marginalized and privileged are not two categories of people. They are descriptions of positionality that apply to each of us within various contexts and dynamics. Not shorthand for good and evil, but morally neutral halves of a system called hierarchy, each part required for the system to persist. Social justice is not an issue of morality, altruism, or kindness. It is one of function. It is only through the synthesis of resources and insight, external and internal power, that an alternative materializes. Freedom, empowerment, anarchy, magic. Whenever I find myself clinging to a dichotomy, especially when it's in alignment with something that I've always believed, that signals an immediate red flag to me. Dichotomies, binaries, rigidity, controls, certainty, these tools belong to hierarchy. So if I'm unable to synthesize the dialectic, I have to ask, not just what am I missing, but what's been kept from me, and why? What is it about this dichotomy that triggers a Pavlovian sense of safety or superiority in me, and which hierarchies am I being driven to reproduce or reinforce because of it? For example, you want to be a rugged individualist? Great, I agree. I think you should live your best life. But to do it effectively, you need to synthesize the dialectic. Notice that your capacity is fundamentally tied to others, and that therefore it is in your best interest to do what you can to ensure that all of their needs are met, which requires an acknowledgement and respect of their material reality. You're a card-carrying collectivist? Dope! I agree. People should give a shit about each other. But do it effectively. Surely you can see that continuously pouring from an empty cup does not fill the communal well, comrade. That the capacity of the collective is fundamentally tied to the individual, and that therefore it is in your best interest to ensure utmost autonomy and subjectivity, which requires acknowledgement and respect of those whack-ass metaphysical ideals. It's diabolical as fuck, but even calling it diabolical anthropomorphizes the phenomena of hierarchy, assigning intent and ingenuity where there isn't any. A virus doesn't become less lethal over time because it's clever, but because the viruses that don't simply self-destruct alongside their hosts. It's not survival of the fittest, it's just survival. Reproduction based on the existing circumstances. If a virus could multiply and spread through dead hosts, then it would evolve to disregard lethality. In different survival circumstances, the qualities that determine fitness are also different. It works like this because it works like this. So if we want things to work differently, it's gotta go. Whatever comes next isn't set in stone, but whatever it is, definitionally cannot be what works today. Means and ends is yet another such false dichotomy. We gotta wrangle them together. We need to be realistic in order to work effectively towards achieving our ideals, yet being realistic is so often used as a diversion tactic to get people to settle for less or veer entirely off track. Being genuinely realistic is the opposite of settling. We need to take one step at a time, but an effective step forward has to be a step closer, not sideways. There is a fundamental difference between a stepping stone and a sinking stone. Staying in place doesn't move us closer. Going the wrong way doesn't move us closer. Going backwards doesn't move us closer. A continuous cycle of taking 3 steps forward and 3 steps back doesn't move us closer. If it looks like settling, it probably is. If it looks like you're laying stones in the wrong direction, you probably are. Course correct. Or don't. I'm not a cop. But don't be all surprised Pikachu when we spin our wheels into eternity. Or into an apocalypse, whichever comes first. If we allow our idealism to inform our materialism and vice versa, the embodiment of that dialectic fundamentally shifts the way that we interact with the world. It's transformative. In our conscious actions and decisions, yes, but also in the ways that we move. In our tones, our body language, in the moments where we pause instinctually before realizing why. The only way out is to stop trying to pick one or waffle between them and instead encapsulate both. Not sometimes one and sometimes the other, not a balanced blend or midpoint, but the entirety of the relationships between them and their context. Not compromise nor a means to an end, but the unity of means and ends. Understanding how the pieces fit together and inform one another so that we can effectively self-determine the best available options through endlessly changing circumstances. Not switching from being governed by one set of hierarchies to another, but becoming truly self-governed. Ungovernable. This isn't some banana ass enlightened centrism. It's anarchism, baby. This is as far left as it gets, and then some. I can already hear someone typing in the comments about the authoritarian left. Listen, I see the appeal of employing familiar tools, and I get the desire for simple rules and prescriptions. I understand their value and the extent of their necessity, I really do. But I don't want to lie to you. The opposition to authoritarian or statist leftist strategies is not one of morality or vibes, but of function. It's all about function. Lies to children is a concept developed by scientist Jack Cohen and mathematician Ian Stewart. It was first discussed in the 1994 book The Collapse of Chaos, Discovering Simplicity in a Complex World, and then later popularized when the duo collaborated with author Terry Pratchett, yes that one, spotlighting lies to children in the book The Science of Discworld. Andrew Sawyer describes lies to children as the necessarily simplified stories we tell children and students as a foundation for understanding, so that eventually they can discover that they are not, in fact, true. I've been alluding to this concept throughout the entirety of this video, and now we're gonna tie it all together. Hopefully. The idea is a nod to Wittgenstein's ladder, a metaphor for learning. Translated from the original German, Ludwig Wittgenstein can be quoted as stating,
"My propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical, when he has used them as steps to climb beyond them. He must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up it. He must transcend these propositions, and then he will see the world aright."
As described in The Science of Discworld, a lie to children is a statement that is false, but which nevertheless leads the child's mind towards a more accurate explanation, one that the child will only be able to appreciate if it has been primed with a lie. It's the reason social constructs exist, these spooky blueprints that dictate our lives, the ones we're all too familiar with. At the end of the day, reality is far too complicated for us to grasp. All models are wrong, but some are useful. All expertise is inherently limited by the subjectivity of human perspective, and if it were necessary for us to understand how every component of our daily lives works in order to function, we simply would not. There is not enough lifetime available to become an expert in all things. Lies to children are useful, they are necessary, and they change over time. They're not malicious, they're clumsy approximations which have in many cases overstayed their welcome. They're costumes, cool at parties and conventions, but very, very different from the characters that exist in fictional worlds being emulated. In a 1999 interview, Pratchett commented upon the phrase,
"I like the lies to children motif, because it underlies the way we run our society and resonates nicely with Discworld. But it's like that in real science too. You arrive with your sparkling A levels all agleam, and the first job of the tutors is to reveal that what you thought was true is only true for a given value of truth. Most of us need just enough knowledge of the sciences, and it's delivered to us in metaphors and analogies that bite us in the bum if we think they're the same as the truth."
We tell children that sky is blue and grass is green because that's true enough for their purposes. If it becomes relevant, they may one day discover the intricacies of that lie and replace it with a more holistic understanding of how color is perceived, and that would be fine and dandy. But here's where we've gone wrong as a society. The lies to children approach to education is performed without disclosure, and this has produced adults who steadfastly carry these lies as absolute truths. Not metaphors or analogies in place to construct the world into something more easily navigated, but truths onto themselves. They're supposed to be temporary and fluid, evolving as we grow as individuals and as a society, but by clinging to them, we've made a mess. Now, the name Lies to Children feels a little infantilizing. We do societally tend to imagine children, students, and amateurs as stupid nonsense people that need to be talked down to for their own good. But I think that highlights the problem I'm wanting to address with the way that we conceptualize education and learning, especially in regards to anarchism, leftism, and revolutionary strategies. We are, after all, always learning and growing as individuals. There is no point in time where a person crosses the threshold from student or newbie into omniscient entity worthy of being taken seriously. Even the concept itself, this idea of a ladder that one must climb, is a faulty oversimplification intended to demonstrate a basic idea. Education isn't linear, and people aren't standing on different rungs on the ladder to enlightenment. Rather, the nature of subjective human experience leads people to reaching various conclusions and understandings via an insanely complicated web, a unique matrix of materials that can never be truly replicated. One of the most challenging aspects of standardized education is that there is no way to independently assess what someone knows and understands in order to effectively connect the next dot outside of like a collaborative one-on-one setting, to make sure a concept actually clicks in a way that can carry across different contexts. So by necessity, we end up teaching the test. Remember this, do it like that. Here is the rubric, follow these rules. But children don't need to be treated like they're stupid. We can tell them when they're being shown a useful metaphor. We don't, because then they ask more questions. People describe this as being incredibly annoying, which is true. Adults are tired and grumpy sometimes. Life under capitalism demands more of us than we have to give, and our relationships bear the brunt of it. Now, If you've predicated your authority over a child as being contingent on your status as benevolent, all-knowing being who must be obeyed, then these questions run the very real risk of revealing very quickly that you're actually a human, just like them, who uses lies and metaphors as patches for gaps in knowledge, and then they turn into teenagers. And adults hate teenagers because that benevolent, all-knowing being myth has been shattered and replaced. We rip curiosity, collaboration, and critical analysis from their clenched fists and then blame them for their ineptitude. They've discovered your fallibility and in doing so have beaten you, taking over the throne in their own mind. Teenagers turn into little godlings and they're unbearable because they know they're right about some things. They can tell they've been lied to, and yet they're simultaneously so confidently wrong about other things. They double down because to be wrong about anything is to risk being dethroned, and by now they've had quite enough of being dismissed and lorded over by someone they know to be just as fallible as themselves. Sometimes this is temporary, and through certain engagements with the world around them, a sense of curiosity and collaboration is reignited, but not always. Often enough, they become adults who then turn around and condescend to children, and anyone else in regards to whom they can craft some justification for the validity of their own perspective, no matter how tenuous. I'm talking about politics. Paulo Freire describes this as the banking model of education in his most notable text, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which the scope of action allowed to children, students, and amateurs extends only as far as receiving, filling, and storing the deposits. Altering or expanding upon the deposits themselves in any way is an action only allowed to adults, teachers, and experts. Simultaneously, the only students that are able to progress into the role of teacher are the ones for whom these deposits require little to no alteration or expansion to connect with. In this way, a system is developed to carry on and reinforce the lineage of these predetermined deposits of knowledge. Freire describes in vivid detail the patterns of educatory communication that are introduced to us as youths through formal structures like schools, churches, and family, which persist and are reproduced through adulthood, very effectively decimating any and all attempts at revolution through categorical division. Of course, if what's at stake is personhood, then admitting ignorance is unacceptable. The lack of collaboration means that adversaries don't have to be wrong about everything, because being wrong about anything is sufficient enough grounds for complete dismissal. In this way, the oppressed absorb the mindset of the oppressor, using their tools to try to dismantle a system built by and for them. We learn the test, teach the test, and then we blame people for their ineptitude, ourselves included.
Shame!
This book was published around 60 years ago. It's a short read, and it's one of those that's so prophetic that it makes you a little nauseous. Truly, there is nothing new under the sun. The state of political discourse, for as long as I've engaged with it, is so immensely run through with this sort of I know what's best, so shut up and listen mentality. I've experienced the effects of it firsthand. You've witnessed it 1,000 times over. There was a time, not that long ago, when I wholeheartedly believed that every moment of suffering on this goddamn planet was at least in part my responsibility, and that every moment of joy I indulged in was being selfishly siphoned away from someone more deserving. Now, those aren't words that I would have used to describe what was happening at the time, and had I been handed those words, they would have been swiftly rejected. But that is what it was. I could see the problems, and all I wanted was a way out, but all I could think to do was double down. I thought I could fix it if I just tried a little harder, worked a little longer. I have since raised my standards. The pandemic was a catalyst for some very intense radicalization, but boy howdy was I ready for it. I went in a miserable little sock dem ghoul and came out with a level of unhinged optimism that I hadn't experienced since ever. I also came out in other ways. Oversimplifications make my life worse, and I'm sick of them. The lies that deal in politics and people are repetitive, an unending barrage to contend with daily, and they have become mind-numbingly tedious. Even for the best possible reasons, even knowing it might be valuable to you, I don't wanna. Not out of some sense of righteousness or morality, but out of self-preservation and a healthy respect for efficacy. I'm tired. Other people can do it. There are loads of leftist and leftist-adjacent creators who will gladly walk folks through simplified prescriptions, and some of them are doing beautiful, valuable work. But that's not what I'm here for. Here is where you come to trade lies for stories. Videos like this are blended propaganda and education. They exist to stoke the flame of internal power. They do nothing for you on the external end. In order to keep the wheel turning, you gotta do the work of determining how to leverage your existing capacities, including any expansion of internal or external power, to practice anarchism in ways that increase your capacity and the capacity of your communities. That's the underlying risk factor everyone's been picking at when it comes to edutainment and parasociality. Education without participation does nothing, and participation without education also does nothing. Doing something requires collaboration. We have a relationship, but our relationship isn't collaborative, it's transactional. There's a difference between an audience and a community. I do not know you. You are not a part of my life, and we are not in mutually developing community. There is little to no opportunity to apply these theories and practice these skills in order to further develop them here. I can't offer you individualized advice because the right answers are only discovered through meaningful dialogue, the kind that's only possible between people who get each other, a semantic alignment that's forged through that beautiful formula of positionality plus time and effort. And I can't be in mutually developing community with the overwhelming majority of you. The attempt would make my life worse, and that would make me worse. I don't have access to absolute truth. I am not the answer. But I can tell you better stories if you like. Intricate and carefully woven, truer than most, made truer still through the art of disclosure. There is no universal spreadsheet, there is no instruction manual or troubleshooting guide for life, and if you try to follow one, you will always get it wrong because you have to become the mechanic. And God help us all, you've got to be good at it. There are as many correct answers as there are people occupying each and every individual position in space and time. There is a right answer, but the right answer here, today, is the wrong answer there, tomorrow, because it is dependent on context, on the sum of every moment that's come to pass and every moment that may come to pass. That's all this is. The revolution has already begun. Join me. Good God, that was a lot. I actually have a whole second document full of content that I had to cut to try and hold on to something vaguely resembling like the essence of a through line. I just really wanted to lay down and connect all of the foundational pieces in one place because they can and have been built upon into more theory and applications and branches than a person could ever hope to absorb within a single lifetime. And at least from where I'm standing, nothing about anarchism or relationship anarchy is coherent without the unity of means and ends. It's been said that if you don't understand the unity of means and ends, you don't understand anarchism. Well, that and hierarchy, but I already did that video. And then once those pieces click into place, you can really start to apply them to anything and everything. And like, anarchism does have a rich and storied history, but anarchism is also a semantic shortcut, or like an umbrella term for a collection of specific patterns, ideologies, and systems that have been and continue to be smattered across space-time. Ye anarchists of old didn't invent anarchism any more than Isaac Newton invented gravity. They may have collected bits and pieces, drawn connections between them, and then extrapolated on and propagandized them in certain ways according to their context, but the patterns themselves have always existed. You can find threads of anarchist ideology almost anywhere, though in varying levels of cohesion and efficiency. Which is why I tend to start spiraling whenever people ask me for like a reading list or additional resources. There is no universal curriculum, and what matters isn't how much theory you read or who wrote it, but how much of it resonates. Speaking from first-hand experience, a person can understand every sentence being communicated, might even agree, without actually getting it for years. And that's not a matter of intellectual capacity or effort, but the extent to which your experiences in life have created adequate purchase for what's being communicated to connect with and latch onto. It's the right material and methods meeting the right person within the right container. That's not something I can predict, and yet, it makes sense that you would want more in between, admittedly infrequent uploads. And it's very exciting actually, because it tells me that something I communicated did resonate on some level. Even if that resonance is the itch of disagreement, if it's sparking curiosity and a desire to dig deeper, then I feel like I've done what I set out to. So if that's the case for you, I have two pieces of good news. First, welcome to Related and Recommended. I'm gonna start doing this at the end of every video. Again, these are not necessarily resources nor endorsements, they're invitations down some rabbit holes that might catch your fancy depending on which ideas in this video made you tingly or itchy. Without further ado, if you do want to know more about the historical precedent and application of the unity of means and ends principle within anarchism, Zoe Baker's got you covered. She's an anarchist historian and scholar, literally has a PhD on the history of anarchism. The unity of means and ends comes up a lot in her videos, but I'm gonna recommend Means and Ends, the anarchist critique of seizing state power, because that does a perfect job of defining it and historical anarchists' relationship to it. I'm also gonna recommend her conversation with Vosh, titled Vosh versus Zoe Baker on electoral politics, as a really fascinating look at the sort of back and forth argumentation around this principle that continually comes up within leftist political spaces. If you're interested in the psychologically traumatic effects of hierarchy, Andrewism has a video called Why Revolution Needs Therapy, and it is excellent. It's succinct, it's sharp, it covers everything it needs to, and then it ends, which is a quality I'm starting to envy. I also want to point you towards his most recent video, We Need a Library Economy, which was done in collaboration with the folks over at the Seriously Wrong podcast, as a fucking delightful example of the wonderful kinds of alternative prescriptions that become accessible through anarchism. If you're intrigued about time as a non-linear entity and how that affects our free will, CJ the X does a beautiful job diving into those ideas in the video Arrival, Time is an Illusion. And honestly, if this was an enjoyable experience for you, if you like dense philosophical videos that go fast, I mean that's their whole beat. And there are gems in every single video on that channel. And lastly for today, if the lies to children concept or banking model of education made you feel some type of way, check out What Physicists Don't Want You to Know About Quantum Mechanics by Dr. Fatima, an exploration of objectivity and positionality in science. Newer channel, just launched in August, and I am very fucking stoked to finally access this perspective, especially here on YouTube, because it's felt missing for entirely too long.
Okay, I know I said that was the last one, but this came out while I was editing, and it's too perfect not to include. It's too perfect. It's a video from Vihart, mathematician, and it's actually a sort of response to a different video from Hank Green, both of which are about this math question test thing that went viral on Twitter, because it's, one of those where people have a knee-jerk reaction about what the right answer is, and also about what having a different answer means about someone, and what the fact that people have different answers to a question that seems obvious says about the human condition more broadly. And if you want to see someone who is, as far as I know, not an anarchist, truly rip a question to shreds and then put it back together in a way that embodies the unity of means and ends, look no further. I want this video on a t-shirt. I want it on a billboard. I want it carved into my skin. Like if I could just have a little screen implanted onto my belly like a Teletubby, or just like every single frame tattooed onto my body, that would be good. Which is a feeling I get a lot, and the reason I don't actually have any tattoos yet.
As always, links are in the doobly-doo. As for the second piece of good news, I'm gonna be around more often, in a different format. At time of recording, this channel isn't monetized at all, which is exceedingly unsustainable given what goes into this. And that's a bummer, because I have a lot more to say and I'd love to keep making videos. So, I've set up a Patreon. Perks include an exclusive monthly livestream for patrons, as well as a public monthly livestream available to anyone who shows up, the length of which is determined by the number of people who sign up for that tier on Patreon. I'm not planning on leaving them up for more than a few hours after they've ended, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss them. Perks will probably change over time, and I do have some other ideas for Patreon stuff on the back burner, but I'm still kind of ironing out the details so that they're, valuable to patrons while still being healthy and sustainable for me. But yeah, if you like what I do, consider giving me money so that I can pay myself to do it, and hopefully one day maybe even pay other people to make the project better and different. And if you'd like to support this project another way, I would highly appreciate it if you would like and share this video. This is a baby channel. Spreading the content around so that I can find the people it's meant to helps more than anything else. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching this monstrosity of a video all the way to the end. That people are invested enough in what I have to say to listen to me talk for this long really does mean the world to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye!